What happens when the most powerful voice in gospel music never even held the mic? When a woman unseen by the spotlight becomes the soul behind a movement, shaping the sound of worship across generations. This is not just a story about a choir director, it is about a quiet storm. A woman whose hands led more prayers than sermons ever could. Lou Della Evans Reid did not chase fame, she carried purpose. And in doing so, she left behind something eternal. But buried beneath her beautiful music are truths the church never wanted you to hear. Stay with us, because what you are about to learn will not just move your heart, it will reveal a legacy that was never meant to be forgotten. One of the strongest and most loved voices in gospel music has gone quiet forever. Lou Della Evans Reid, a legendary choir director whose voice and spirit touched generations, has passed away at the age of 94. But what she gave the world was much more than music. She left behind a powerful story filled with praise, pain, and truths that many people were never meant to know. Stay with us, because what you are about to hear will reach into your heart and stay with you long after it ends. Today, the gospel world is grieving. Something feels different. Churches are quieter. Choirs are gentler. Even the organ keys seem to rest in silence a little longer than usual. That is because a giant in gospel music, a woman whose spirit moved millions, has gone home. Lou Della Evans Reid, the gifted soul behind some of the most powerful and soul-stirring choir arrangements in history, has passed away at the age of 94. But this story is not just about her passing. It is about her presence and how that presence shaped the sound and spirit of gospel music as we know it. Lou Della Evans Reid was not just a choir director, she was a force. Her life was not only about music, it was about ministry, legacy, and love. From the early days in small churches on Chicago's South Side to grand gospel festivals that reached across the country and around the world, Lou Della left a mark wherever she went. She did not just direct choirs, she set the atmosphere. When she lifted her hand, the room changed. When she spoke, the singers listened. But more than that, when she prayed, heaven responded. Every movement of her hand was deliberate. Every harmony she arranged was thoughtful. Every lyric she chose was loaded with meaning and power. It was never just about a beautiful song, it was about a life-changing experience. People felt something when she led, whether you were sitting in the back pew of a local church or standing on a massive gospel stage with thousands watching. Her presence made everything feel personal and sacred. Her leadership did not depend on volume or attention, it came from her spirit. She led with humility, grace, and a deep love for the music of the church and the people it served. She taught generations how to worship through song. She showed singers how to use their voices as instruments of healing. Her choirs were not just well-trained, they were anointed. Lou Della believed that gospel music was more than notes on a page. It was a lifeline, a message, a ministry tool, and she carried that belief into every rehearsal, every service, and every performance. People from across the country knew her sound even if they did not know her name. That is how powerful her influence was. Many churches and choirs still use her style, her structure, and her spirit as their guide. Her fingerprints are on voices that never even met her. That is how deep her legacy runs. She was a quiet storm. She did not chase awards or headlines. She never needed flashing lights or applause. What she wanted was impact. What she poured into others was purpose. And that purpose lived far beyond music stands and microphones. It lived in the people she mentored, the lives she touched, and the worship moments she created that led people to God. And now, as we look back on her incredible life, we do not just see a woman who worked hard, we see a woman who gave everything. A woman who built something holy, something lasting. She poured herself out in every harmony, every prayer, every lesson. And now, heaven has received her with the sound of the choirs she once led. So today, while we mourn, we also remember. We celebrate, we honor. Because Lou Della Evans Reid was more than a voice behind the choir. She was the spirit behind the sound. And her echo will live on in every note sung with heart, every choir led with faith, and every life lifted through worship. In the next few minutes, we will take a closer look at her powerful journey from a preacher's daughter to a true gospel legend. You will hear stories of how she stood strong in a male-run industry, how she shaped the sound of gospel in Chicago, how she lifted others up, and why parts of her story were kept quiet by the very church she helped build. You do not want to miss what is coming. Because Lou Della's life was not just history, it was a movement. Her death marks the close of a chapter many tried to hide but could never erase. Whether you grew up under her leadership or are just learning her name now, Her story will show you a side of gospel music you may never have seen. Long before the fame. Before the choir robes and loud amens, Lou Della Evans Reid was a young girl with a gift. Born in 1930, she was the daughter of Reverend Clay Evans, a powerful voice in gospel and civil rights. Their home in Chicago's South Side was filled with music, faith, and purpose. Back then, church was not something you chose, it was a way of life. The organ was not just music, it was the heartbeat of the whole community. From a very young age, Lou Della stood by her father's side in the choir, soaking in every sound, every rise and fall in the music, every emotional shout of worship. But she was not just another singer. Even as a child, she had a sharp ear and a strong presence. People noticed how she could hear missing notes in her head, how she knew exactly what harmony was needed. That gift grew stronger. By her teens, she was already reworking hymns and leading choirs, doing things most girls her age were never allowed to do. Still, her path was not easy. The 1950s and 60s were a time when gospel music was led by men, male pastors, male singers, male directors. Women were expected to follow. But Lou Della Evans Reid was not made to follow. She was bold, talented, and ready to lead. And lead she did. She began directing at her father's church, Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church, a place that became the heart of the Chicago gospel sound. There, she trained choirs to sing not just with power, but with soul, spirit, and discipline. She did not need fancy tricks. Her leadership came from deep love, strong faith, and years of dedication. Her bold, heartfelt arrangements changed gospel music forever. Her hands did not just move, they led. When Lou Della Evans Reid stepped into a room, the atmosphere shifted. There was no need for her to speak loudly or demand attention. Her presence alone brought order. Her leadership brought focus. People felt it. Choir members stood straighter. Musicians adjusted their posture. And everyone listened. Because when Lou Della lifted her hands, she was not just keeping rhythm, she was calling down power. Word of her talent began to spread. Church leaders, musicians, and singers from all over started to take notice. They wanted her voice. They wanted her arrangements. They wanted the spirit she carried. She had something special, a blend of musical genius, spiritual depth, and quiet authority that could not be taught in any classroom. But here's where her story goes even deeper. Lou Della Evans Reid was never just about the music. She was building something far greater. She was laying down a foundation that would carry her family's name, her church's reputation, and her city's gospel identity into the pages of history. What she gave to gospel music was not just sound, it was soul. A soul rooted in faith, strength, and an unshakable calling. As we move into the next part of her journey, one truth becomes clear. Lou Della became the heartbeat of the Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church's world-famous choir. But she was not in the background. She was not simply the daughter of a well-known pastor. She was standing right there beside her father, Reverend Clay Evans, shoulder to shoulder. In many ways, she helped him grow as a leader. She shaped the sound that backed his sermons. And some even say she challenged him musically in ways that pushed him beyond his comfort zone. Lou Della never asked for fame. She did not release albums under her name. She did not appear on flashy stages. Yet, the choirs she trained, the songs she arranged, and the worship moments she created have touched hearts across the world. Even without headlines or awards, she stood tall. Her legacy cannot be measured in fame, but in lives changed and worship elevated. She taught choirs how to move with unity, how to listen, how to sing with meaning, not just talent. And most importantly, she taught them how to connect with God through their voices. Her leadership was quiet, but it was unshakable. She never forced her way to the front, but somehow, the whole room followed her lead anyway. That is real power. And that is what made Lou Della Evans Reid unforgettable. In the gospel world, many people chase the spotlight, but Lou Della chased the Spirit. And in doing so, she left behind something far more valuable than fame. She left behind a legacy. A legacy of sound, of strength, of service, and of a woman who chose calling over credit. She may not have been the loudest voice in the room, but she was the most trusted. She may not have been the one on the microphone, but she was the one every choir member looked to. And that, in the end, is what true leadership looks like. But behind the curtain, she was everything. If those church walls could speak, they would tell the story of a woman who led with her voice, her prayers, and her power. Reverend Evans may have preached the sermons, But it was Lou Della Evans Reid who shaped the sound of the church, the sound that would echo across neighborhoods, cities, and eventually, the world. Let's go back in time. Chicago in the 1960s and 70s was the heart of gospel music. Mahalia Jackson, Thomas Dorsey, James Cleveland, these were legends shaking the city's spirit. But while they were traveling and making records, Lou Della was doing something just as powerful. She was building a deeper sound. One rooted in worship, filled with tradition, and bold enough to try what no other choirs dared. At Fellowship, she was more than a music leader, she shaped lives. She trained everyone from young kids to church elders to sing not just with skill, but with heart. Her choirs were known for their deep harmonies, powerful bass lines, and calandra styles that pulled people into the worship. And then there was that special Chicago bounce rhythm, something she helped shape. And that would become a signature in gospel music for years to come. And remember, this was before fancy tools like in-ear monitors or click tracks. Lou Della was the beat. Her hands were her instruments. One look from her could stop a note or spark a new one. If the spirit moved, she changed the whole direction of the song right there. Live. What made her so special was not just her musical skill, it was her spiritual wisdom. She prayed before every rehearsal. She told her singers, if you're not prayed up, you can't sing up. She believed gospel music was not about performance. It was about ministry. It was healing. It was truth. It was a lifeline. And through her, some of the most powerful worship moments in Chicago's history were born. On Sundays, people drove from other states just to sit in the balcony and feel what she brought. In those moments, people cried, healed, and gave their lives to God. Her influence spread far. The Chicago Mass Choir, Walt Whitman, and the Soul Children of Chicago, and many big church choirs across the country learned from her arrangements, sometimes even by studying her rehearsal tapes. But maybe her greatest impact was quiet. She mentored other choir directors behind the scenes, teaching them to lead with both skill and spirit. She stood beside other women who felt called to lead in places still ruled by men. She lifted them up without needing awards, fame, or public credit. But through all the power she carried, there was a quiet sadness. As the Fellowship Choir became famous, many gave the credit only to Reverend Clay Evans, forgetting that it was Lou Della's hands, her heart, and her sound that built the foundation. Most people outside of Chicago had no idea that Lou Della Evans Reid was the one who shaped that unforgettable sound. She was not in the spotlight, but her touch was on every note. And even without applause, she kept giving. Because for her, it was never about being praised, it was about purpose. But here comes the unexpected part. Even after leading gospel worship for almost 50 years, she walked away. Why? The real reason might surprise you. In this next part of her story, we will look at the season when Lou Della left the choir stand and how, years later, she came back with even more strength. Even great leaders go through quiet times, and when Lou Della stepped down, it left a silence that many still feel. For nearly 40 years, she had been the soul of Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church's music, but in the late 1980s, something changed. Quietly, without any drama, she stepped down. There was no goodbye celebration, no big announcements, she just disappeared from the choir stand. Many believed she was simply tired. After years of work rehearsing, leading, mentoring, maybe she needed rest. Some thought she stepped back to care for her family. But those who knew her best later shared the deeper truth. She was tired not just in body but in spirit. She had given so much to others for so long that she had nothing left for herself. She was carrying grief. She had lost dear friends and longtime choir members. The weight of leading, always being expected to deliver something powerful, had taken a toll. And another thing hurt her deeply. The gospel music world was changing. What was once sacred now felt more like show business. That shift was painful for someone like Lou Della, whose ministry came from the heart. She told a few trusted women in the church, "I don't want to be part of something that looks like God but has no oil." That is when she chose to walk away. For almost 10 years, she stayed away from directing. She was still present at church and close to her father's ministry, but she was no longer up front. No rehearsals, no waving her hands to guide songs. It was like being in the wilderness, a long, quiet season, but God was not done with her. In the late 1990s, something began to stir again. One day during service, a visiting preacher looked right at her and said, "God says your voice still matters, and your hands still carry the oil." Lou Della began to cry. That was the moment she knew it was time to return. But she did not come back to the same platform. She came back stronger as the founder of the Traditional Gospel Choir of Chicago. This was a new group made up of older saints, young singers, and everyone in between. Her mission: to keep the original sound of gospel alive, pure, powerful, and untouched by commercial trends, and she came back with fire. Her new choir was a spiritual force. They sang at churches, revivals, and conferences all over the Midwest. Lou Della brought back the soul of Sunday mornings: the hand claps, the foot stomps, the tearful solos, and the old-school gospel sound that moved hearts. What shocked people most was how powerful she sounded after nearly 10 years away. Her voice was even stronger. Her spirit, even freer. Because sometimes, when God takes you through the valley, it is to make your return even more powerful. And that is exactly what happened. Her comeback sparked a revival of traditional gospel across the country. Lou Della Evans Reid showed us something special. True ministry never retires, it grows deeper. While most people her age were slowing down, she kept going. Even in her 80s and 90s, she remained a leader, a teacher, and a spiritual mother in the gospel world. She held community workshops, spoke at women's events, mentored young choir leaders, and opened her home to gospel gatherings. Lou Della knew that legacy was not just what you leave behind. It is about who you lift up while you are still here. And she lifted so many. She did not just teach people how to sing. She taught them how to live with purpose. Choir members still remember her walking into rehearsals with a cane or a walker and still directing with that same fire in her eyes. They said, when Mother Lou walked in, the room changed. She made them want to sing with their whole hearts. Not just to impress, but to heal. She would pray over each person before performances, laying hands, speaking blessings, and reminding them why they were singing. In her words, we're not singing for applause. We're singing so somebody's chains can fall. Even in her 90s, she never lost that fire. She still spoke at events, mentored others, and boldly told the truth. To young choir leaders, she would say, "You've got the talent, but do you have the oil?" That one question still rings in gospel circles today. In her final months, her health began to fade. But even from her hospital bed, she was still praying for others. Nurses said they would hear her softly humming old hymns in the night. Songs like "I Need Thee Every Hour" and "Precious Lord, Take My Hand." One nurse shared an infamous moment when Lou Della looked up and whispered, "Tell them, God never stopped being good." Those were some of her last words. And when she passed peacefully at 94, surrounded by loved ones, the gospel world stood still. Tributes poured in from everywhere. Chicago Mass Choir, Byron Cage, Ricky Dillard, Shirley Caesar, Vicki Witt, and so many who had been touched by her voice or shaped by her example. Church bells rang across the city. Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church held a beautiful multi-day celebration with choir reunions, tributes, and heartfelt stories. Because Lou Della Evans Reid did more than lead music, she changed lives.